Welcome to Radiant Moments, a podcast dedicated to healing and resilience through life's complexities. I'm your host, Michelle, and today we're embracing a topic so many of us struggle with: overwhelm, burnout, and reclaiming time for self-care. Joining us is Daniela Wolfe, a licensed master's social worker with over 27 years of experience helping stressed and burnt out professionals find practical strategies to ditch guilt and overwhelm, manage their time productively, and create space for healing every day. Daniela is the author of Balanced Breakthrough and the host of Bestie Life podcast. Through her heart-centered approach, she helps women transform their daily lives, one habit, one boundary, and one mindset shift at a time. Daniela, I'm so grateful you're here to share your journey and wisdom with our Radiant Moments community.
Thank you so much, Michelle. I'm excited to be here.
And I'm so excited to have you here. Daniela, your story is deeply relatable. You found yourself overwhelmed and burnt out during an incredibly challenging season, parenting very young children while navigating a divorce. It sounds like that moment changed everything for you. Can you tell us what that season was like and what it took for you to realize that the life you were living wasn't sustainable long term?
Absolutely. Yeah, even as a social worker, so many times as helpers, we are great at helping everybody else and not always so much at taking care of ourselves. As well as I'm high achieving person. I love proving that I'm capable of doing things, as well as during that season of my life, especially going through a divorce and parenting kids. I wanted to almost prove that I could handle it. In my own mind, I had some limiting beliefs that if people were assuming I would fail. People were assuming I couldn't do it all. And I wanted to prove that I could. And in the process was absolutely burning myself. And that showed up. I was irritable. I was snapping at my kids more than I wanted to. And definitely just not, we were always rushing, always just on this kind of high adrenaline, high intensity, intense kind of pressure. And it definitely kind of knocked me to my knees. And I realized this was not who I was. This wasn't who I wanted my kids remembering. And so I definitely started to kind of practice what I help everybody else with. And it wasn't a massive overhaul. It actually started super small. I started with a daily gratitude practice, listing 3 to 5 things I was grateful for every day. It could have been I live in the Northeast, and it could have been the sun was out that day. It could have been someone held the door for me, or I got to have my favorite banana smoothie. Small, simple moments that made me smile, that brought me joy. At the time, my grocery store also had free childcare, which was great. And so I started utilizing that. But it also was some work of getting over those mindset shifts of when I ran into somebody and they'd be like, oh, where are the kids? Not feeling guilty for putting them in there, not beating myself up and feeling like I had to over justify. As well as I joined a gym to add some more movement that also had childcare. And I found all these simple little shifts, just these 3 things. Not only did I start to show up better at work and at home, but my kids did too. They got to meet new people. We started just having different kinds of conversations, sharing what we were doing, working through this process, as well as my kids grew up while I was on this journey. At the time, they were 4 and 6 months old. Now they're 24 and 20. On this journey, not only got to see me in a different way and see how I respected myself and see what my boundaries were, it taught them how to treat me, but also taught them how to manage stress, how to take care of themselves as they were managing more responsibilities in their lives and set themselves up for success in a way that wasn't going to burn themselves out. And as I was on this journey, I was doing different things and people were gravitated and asking, what are you doing? How can I integrate this? As well as sharing with me moments that they took for themselves because of something I just said or did being me. And I realized I think we're all looking for that validation and permission that it's okay to take time for ourselves. And I truly believe it's just not even okay, but just a daily necessity.
Yes, some of the things that you just said then about daily gratitude to support carers long term, daily gratitude, I think, is one of the most vital things to just appreciate those really small moments when it's really hard. And it's so powerful that you didn't just survive that season of your life, but you've turned your experience into a mission to help others break free from overwhelm and find balance. And when we were talking about gratitude and just finding small things to keep propelling yourself forward, like the daycare in the supermarket or in your gym and finding movement, it's so inspirational for others to hear how those small steps integrated into life can make such a long-term difference.
Yes.
So, how has that personal journey shaped your approach to coaching and supporting others in this space of preventing burnout?
Yeah. I love to integrate, like you said, micro moments. When I teach these different strategies, the three main pillars that I help in this process, it definitely involves your mindset, how you're planning your time, and then self care. But it's about micro moments throughout your day. You can't go in and try and overhaul your entire life, your entire personality. In a realistic setting, we don't all have that kind of time. But to find one, I can teach a simple, small 1 minute practice before we get off today. So anything from as small as 1 minute to 10 minutes to 15 minutes, that's a lot more manageable. And when you start to stack these micro moments throughout your day, it's not just about instantly feeling that calm Zen feeling, but it's about lowering your stress levels, lowering your cortisol levels and your heart rate on the regular basis so that when life happens unexpectedly, which it does, we're able to respond rather than impulsively react in a way that we might regret and not really feel is aligned with how we want to show up each day. And so definitely seeing it from that perspective makes it so much more easy to integrate in your day-to-day life.
Yes, and I think the micro moments is so powerful. I feel that it can lead you astray to feeling overwhelmed. I've got to make this massive change in my life. And when you have kids, whether they've got medical or not, it's intense.
Yeah.
They have their own little emotions and their own personalities, and navigating that just on a day to day basis is massive. And simple micro moments is breathing,
hmm
because nobody else needs to know that we need a moment. And I think when you're looking at gratitude, micro moments of self care, they're so interlinked. And people think, I had the worst day and I've got nothing. And it could be as simple as someone smiled. You saw someone smile as they walked towards you. And on a day where things are just tough or rough or unexpected emergencies, it's those tiny, tiny micro moments that you should celebrate when you just feel like your day is completely falling apart. And so, Daniela, burnout can feel so nuanced. There are causes we don't always expect, caught by fire, those moments that we just are not prepared for. And from your extensive work, what are some of those surprising or unexpected causes of burnout that people often overlook in your experience?
hmm Yeah. A lot of times people assume burnout comes from the things we don't like, a stressful job, a hard boss, a bad relationship. But actually, studies have shown that the things we're passionate about, the things we love, can actually set us up for burnout more so than some of the negative things. Because you think if you're at a job that you don't always care for, 5 o'clock comes and you're like, bye, I'm out the door versus something you're passionate about that you go all in on, whether it's maybe your kids, if you're an entrepreneur, your business, or a relationship, those things that you go all in on and you toss your boundaries out the window is actually setting you up for burnout a lot more, because you think because it's your passion, you ride the highs and lows so much more intensely because it's personal. You're invested emotionally. You're so much more tied to the outcome than something that you don't care for as much, as well as, like I said, you toss your boundaries out the window and that becomes your sole focus. I remember talking to a new mom who's like, oh my gosh, you're my first adult conversation in the last 2 days because she was so all in on her kids. Or you think if you're all in on a relationship and maybe you don't see your friends as often, or maybe you're all in on your business. And so now you're working more hours than if you had a job, and realizing that's some of the stuff that can throw you out of balance by being so overly hyper focused on one things and not having those boundaries in place, because you need boundaries not just for the things you don't care for, but for the things you love. You can have too much of a good thing. You can have too much ice cream. You can work out too much. You can do too much of a good thing without those boundaries. And, that's a lot of where, when I talk about balance, that's where your balance comes from. It's not about everything being equal, but it's how you adapt, pivot, have resilience, and those boundaries in your life that help you flow through the day to day.
And I noticed as part of that investment of self that you push and you push and you push yourself, and you're like, you might feel like you're on -10, but I can find 20 more. And by reaching in and not having enough to top up the tank. So your self-care
Hmm.
with your gratitude and your exercise and connecting with your team, your community, your cheer squad, things do fall apart much more quickly when you let those vital, they're not just a luxury, they're vital necessities to keep us moving forward. And I know that's something that you emphasize with self care, that it is not a luxury,
Hmm.
but a daily necessity.
Yeah.
And that in shift in mindset can be tough for many. Why do you believe daily self care is so critical, especially for caregivers or high achieving professionals?
Yeah. You got to think, you set the tone for whether it's your family, for the meeting you walk into, all those kind of things. And if you're showing up as a hot mess storm, or if you're showing up depleted, if you're showing up with that negative energy, you're going to spread that to everybody around you. So definitely, as a high achiever, as a caregiver, those are the things you want to be replenishing, just like you charge your phone on the daily several times a day. You need to be recharging yourself. Like I said, self-care, it's not just about feeling calm and zen. It's where you get your confidence from. It's where you get your energy from. And just like you eat multiple times a day, you wouldn't eat on Sunday and think you're not going to be starving on Tuesday. You can't just do self-care for an hour on Saturday and think, oh, I'm good for the week. It needs to be just as consistent as eating, sleeping, and brushing your teeth. And like you said, it's not a luxury. And when I talk about it, it's not, spa days and bubble baths and getaways and massages. Like, I love those things, but those aren't sustainable on a day-to-day basis throughout my day. And so the self-care I teach is a very practical self-care, and it involves everything from how you eat, how you sleep, how you move, how you dress, how you decorate and organize your home, how you connect with others, how you think about money, as well as in that traditional personal development like mindfulness, meditation, journaling, all those kind of things, and gratitude. And so, you look at then these different options and these different ways to start integrating self-care. And then again, we're doing them in micro moments throughout your day. And now you have this fluid system, and it doesn't have to look the same every single day. Like, I bookend my day with parts of my self-care. Like, every morning there's movement and meditation. Some days I only have like
Mm.
10 minutes. And so I do a 5-minute yoga practice and a 5-minute meditation. Some days I have a little bit longer, but that consistency that it happens every day. I end my day with my skincare and an actual book. Some days it's 3 sentences. Some days it's 3 pages. The consistency of putting these practices into place is where you get the benefits from. Like I said, that 1-minute self-care practice, and actually it involves breathing, just like you talked about. Science has shown just that 1 minute can significantly start to lower your cortisol levels, lower your heart rate, increase the dopamine hit of setting a goal and achieving it. And you start to get these
Yes.
benefits. You do 1 minute 5 times a day, you now have a 5-minute self-care practice. It's so simple, and there's so many options, which I love diving into that. When we're stuck in our own kind of blinders of what our day looks like. And so to start to see what that can look like, how simple it can be to add little pieces here and there, is where you really start to get that momentum.
Yes, and it's really important because, like you said before, spa days, getting your nails done, going out for coffee with friends, they aren't daily sustainable, either maybe financially or because you just don't have time to achieve it. And that's something that we really invest in here at Radiant Moments is the micro moments. And it could just be putting your favorite song on,
Hmm. Yeah.
dancing around while you're washing the dishes to bring a slice of joy or to bring movement in. If you're like, I haven't had a chance to do anything, I have run from one appointment to another, and then everybody needs a piece of me.
Hmm.
And so maybe it's that washing the dishes and having a clean bench is like a little moment of increase of good vibes, and it makes you feel stress free so that when you wake up, you feel like, yes, I can do this day. But
Yeah.
maybe it's that you've had a tough day and you feel on the verge of tears and you just need something to help you get through the rest of the evening. and it's a micro moment. It could just be one song. It
Yeah.
could be a 2-minute song, a 3-minute song. And I think that advice is critical to anybody who's going through a season
Yeah.
and they're just feeling heavy.
And it doesn't have to be done alone or in isolation. That's the other, I think, myth around self care. We take that word self too literally. You can do it with your kids, you can do it with your friends or with your family. Laughter, being loud is a great form of self care.
Is very much. And it's important to not take yourself too seriously when you're feeling that the moment is rough, because if you're stressed and then you feel like you're irritated quicker, you don't have the energy to keep going, and it's more emotional, you're more reactive. And I think connection
Mhm.
is the other element with self-care, is that you're right. It doesn't have to be solitary to be rejuvenating. You talked about having, connecting with people, and also, your self-care being able to be done with your children or your partner or a friend. And most people think, oh, well, that's not my community. When we talk about community and developing the people who you can go to share when it's been rough, or somebody that you need just to have a laugh
Yeah.
with. And they don't realize that it's those connections that are closest to us, and they may not be professionals in that space. And that just those moments create micro moments of self care
Yeah.
for them too.
And I loved what you said there as well. You gave the example of like, your days stacked with all these appointments. Everyone's pulling at your time. Your head, you're thinking, oh my gosh, I can't. And I love the way you kind of highlighted that's where those other two pieces come in. Your mindset and your time planning have to happen with the self care. It can't happen in isolation. I believe when you think differently, you feel differently. When you feel differently, you act differently. Because if you're just going through the motions with the self care, but in your head, you're still running through your to-do list or thinking about your next appointment, it's still going to then have that effect on you. And so learning how to change the way you're thinking about how you're spending your time so you don't feel guilty, the conversations in your head, because unfortunately we can be very mean to ourselves versus everybody else. And then just how you're planning your time in your day to set yourself up for success so that you're not constantly on the go at everybody else's whim, that you're more intentional with how you're spacing your day to then have space for those micro moments or for life to happen and it doesn't trip you up.
Yes. Intentional. It's that intentionality of trying to do everything that is possible to support yourself, and being intentional and, like you said, focused. Because as a mum and a carer myself, I know that at times I'm like, oh, I forgot to ring the compounding pharmacist to make sure that the date I need the meds, it'll be ready, and I haven't sent off and confirmed the appointment for this. And you have to pick yourself up in those moments
Hmm.
and go, wait, what am I doing right now? Because even if you're doing the process, you're washing the dishes, maybe the dishes aren't getting done quite as well as we hope. And then when we come back and we go, how did I miss that?
Yeah.
And it's because you're not being intentional. And self care is just as much part
Huge.
of the mental loop
Yep.
as it is in the physical act.
Hmm.
And I was so intrigued when I was going through and researching for today that you developed something called the exhausted to empowered formula.
Hmm.
Would you explain how this formula works and what it means for someone feeling completely drained, stuck, and just not being able to see the light at the end?
Yeah. The exhausted to empower formula, it kind of helps gives you the framework to do these three pieces. So it's made up your mindset, your time planning, and your self-care. So like I said, we actually start with your mindset because how you think is going to affect everything else after that. So we look at, what are some of the things that you're telling yourself, whether it's something you grew up with as a mindset, like you have to hustle to get ahead. If you're not available 24/7, you're not really committed. Or to be a good mom, you have to be with your kids all the time, or whatever some of those stories are. If you're sitting on the couch doing nothing, thinking, oh my gosh, I'm so lazy, just whatever, start looking at what are some of those mindset things that you're stuck in. What are some of those limiting beliefs and how can we start to unpack not only where they came from, but change the script, change the story you're telling yourself, and then be able to make intentional choices with our time and our actions based on that. And so we start with that mindset work of not only then unpacking what you're saying, but looking at kind of replacing it with whether it's positive affirmations, whether it's new ways of thinking. It's not just about making you feel good because you're saying this positive thought, but science has actually shown the more you start kind of exposing yourself, whether it's through gratitude and all these positive thoughts, you activate the RAS, your reticular activating system in your brain, and you're creating not only new kind of awareness. You think of like, you say you want to go buy a red minivan and then you see them everywhere. It's not because there's more, but because you're now more aware of being looking at kind of seeing those kind of things. So you start to see more good in your day, as well as you create new neural pathways in your brain, which takes some repetition, almost like you're going hiking in the woods. You need to go down that new path multiple times before it gets well worn and, easy to follow, like the things you've been thinking for years and years. So the science behind it definitely reinforces the fact that when we focus on our mindset in this simple way, you're going to start to notice more positive moments, see more good things, as well as be able to kind of get into that state of mind quicker. Then with your time planning, we're going to start to look at what are you really prioritizing? Because when you make everything a priority, nothing's really important anymore. And so I use a tool called the Eisenhower Matrix that helps you break down your priorities into what's important and urgent. That's has to get done now by you. What's important but not urgent? What's something that you have to do but maybe not today? What's urgent but not important? So it has to happen, but you might not need to be the person to do it. You could delegate it, you can outsource it. And then what's completely unimportant and unurgent and can leave your calendar completely. And when you start to give tasks different, weight in that way, it's easier to then look at, how your day is structured. Where are you putting the most important things? Are you putting it when you're most distracted and exhausted, or are you doing it at a time that can fit your kind of workflow schedule? Also looking at integrating Parkinson's law. Most tasks will take the amount of time you give it. So if you give something 2 weeks, it'll take 2 weeks. If you give it 2 days, it'll take 2 days. So some things can be done, we don't realize can be done in an hour and a half, 2 hours, if we give ourselves those time kind of constraints, or we break it up and chunk it into smaller pieces so that it's not overwhelming all at once. So again, being intentional, like you said, with our time gives us, again, that control back, as well as gets rid of some of the decision fatigue of, like you said, keeping track of everything in your brain and then losing track of what has to happen. When we start to structure our time intentionally, we find all of a sudden we have more free time because we're not constantly forgetting and doubling back on things. And that's where then we build in what I call buffer time. And that's that space in between the different tasks to either life happens. And sometimes if you're too stacked on top of each other, that's where you run late. That's where you get stressed and overwhelmed. But if life doesn't happen, now you've got a bonus 10 minutes between things to start practicing self-care, to take a quick walk outside, to text that friend you haven't talked to in a while and have that connection. And so you start to create these simple kind of flows and habits throughout your day to be able to leave it in. And then once you get to the self-care part, when we're integrating these pieces, you start to then see the options based on the different areas. Like I said, some of them don't take a ton of time. You think of how you get dressed each day. Are you dressing in a way because it's trendy, but it doesn't maybe work for your comfort level or your body size, and so you're always kind of just fidgeting and whatnot? Or are you showing up confident and energized because you're like, I know I look good and I love the way my clothes feel on me and that kind of thing? It's that simple little shift that changes how you're showing up and that energy that you're bringing to the environment. So that's how they all work together.
Yes.
And it sounds like a lot, but it's small, simple pieces all stacked together.
Yeah, and when you were talking about and writing down what's most important, but it's okay if I don't get done today. As part of that, I find that then you realize how much you can actually do logically in a day, how much is actually achievable. Like when it's up in our mind and we've got all of the filing cabinets open and you're like, oh, yes, I've got to do this and I've got to do this. You find that you feel more guilty, more pressure on yourself because you're like, oh, I didn't get this done and I didn't get that done. But by using that model of allocating what's like life and death has to be done today, what needs to be done, but I don't either like doing it, I find it overwhelming, any of those things. I think that has a massive impact on our mental health and our mindset as well if we don't get it done, because then the guilt creeps in and, you've got all of these other areas that then you have to like put more energy into.
Mhm.
And by seeing it, and not necessarily like some people love a good list.
Yeah.
Some people find it overwhelming to have a list. But I think by breaking it down, even if you've got the list, you can say, okay, I've got 5 things that I have to do today. I might want to do 40, but I've got 5. And it's more bite-sized manageable
Mhm.
in those areas. And when you were talking about mindset, like the things that we're taught as a child or the nuances that we pick up from our parents, like money doesn't grow on trees,
Yes.
or
I'll sleep when
you
I'm dead.
can't sit down until, yeah, until all of the jobs are done. A lot of people don't realize that those old records silently play in the background. And when you start talking about it and discovering those things, they're like, hang on a second, they're actually cause more of my day to be harder. And it's like an aha moment.
Mhm.
Huh. Yes, that was said to me every day for my entire childhood. No wonder I may have made a conscious decision not to do the same thing, but it's such a record. The one that gets played that you don't want it, you didn't need it, but it's there. And I think all of the things that you talk about in that transition and that process of exhausted to empowered formula are so vital. And people don't realize that they're underneath, and that when you do intentional actions, that you can go from surviving to thriving. And that's such an important journey that most of us don't realize as parents are happening in the background for
Mhm.
ourselves. And being able to show up as your best authentic self, that mindset, the intentional actions to improve how we manage each day, and then putting those things into action and having our boundaries and making sure that we are a priority. Because people forget, what happens if we fall apart?
Yeah.
Like who's there to step in with all of the things that we do day to day? So that's such an empowering and powerful transition that you talked about just then. And I wanted us to talk about one of the most important tools to reclaiming time, and that's energy and boundaries.
Mhm.
They can feel so intimidating sometimes. And how do you guide people into identifying? Because that's, as I said, like a massive part of a journey is identifying things
Mhm.
and setting healthy boundaries in ways that feels doable and nourishing to the soul, because we don't want anything to be not nourishing, because that's how we progress.
Right. And definitely just even touch on what you said when it comes to our mental health, to think of it too, it's our mental fitness that we're building by doing these different exercises. So many times people are really attuned to their physical health and they know for their physical fitness, they're going to maybe walk a little bit more, they're going to add more steps, they're going to have some water. They might work with a trainer to get to their goals faster, but they know that physical health and fitness is going to help them not have a heart attack, be able to run with their kids and do different things. So we need to look at our mental fitness, and that's helping to protect our mental health and wellness, just like we do our physical health. And so these different exercises in our mindset, in our time, and our self-care are building our mental fitness and resilience to be able to handle when hard things come up in life so that we bounce back, so that we're able to have that strength through that. And then back to the boundaries question and our energy. Like I said, that's part of how we find our balance. Part of reframing our mindset involves reframing how we see boundaries. Because I think, again, boundaries get a bad rap. They're seen as a no, as a negative, as a wall. Where I see boundaries are very freeing. Boundaries is like one of my favorite B words because it not only gives us the freedom to have some space in our lives and have some control, but it gives us also the freedom to have the energy when we do show up. We're going to be our best selves because of those boundaries. We're going to have more energy. We're going to be more creative. We're going to be more productive at our jobs. We're going to do all these things because we protected our boundaries. I love this analogy I heard where you think of, if you wanted to go to your favorite coffee shop on a Sunday, but every time you showed up at this coffee shop, they weren't open. You never knew when to be there. They didn't have their hours posted outside. And so every time you went, you were just frustrated and annoyed because you couldn't get your favorite coffee. But imagine if they had their
Yeah.
hours posted outside. You're not going to be mad if you show up at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night and they're not open because they communicated, we're not open at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night.
Mm,
They have their boundaries posted. And so you are able to work within it. There's no guilt, there's no anger, there's no bad feelings at all. And so when you see your boundaries
mm,
and communicate them, whether you're communicating at home, my kids knew growing up after a certain time, I got my book out there like, oh, this is mom's bedtime relaxation. We got to give her a moment. In the morning, that's my
mm.
workout, those kind of things. At work, I have an outgoing email when I'm not working that says, thanks so much for reaching out. You'll hear from me between this and this time, and that type of thing. When you communicate your boundaries, you're letting go of feeling like that people pleasing guilt of I'm letting somebody down, I'm not showing up, I'm not being professional, and those kinds of things. And to be able
Mhm.
to start to again build that toolkit of how do I put my boundaries in place? How am I communicating them? Or maybe somebody asks you to do something, you can say, thank you so much for thinking about me. I'm not able to take this on right now, but I would love to be considered for the next project. I think of like when my kids were growing up, the PTA always had something to volunteer for. And I'd be like, I can't do it this month, but sign me up for, is there something in March? And to plan ahead, again, that's a boundary around my time, but that doesn't mean it's a no. It's a yes
Mm.
and or a yes, but. So it can be a yes, but just in a way that's going to work best for you.
Yes. And that's so important to because as parents and carers, sometimes those boundaries get blurred because there's this expectation that we're available 24, 7 days a week, 365 plus days a year, and not being able to recognize and value yourself,
Hmm.
because I think when we're in that space and society has that expectation that we will be everything with every hat on all the time, that also that's where the undertone of guilt or shame or not being
Or
enough.
resentment, even.
Yeah, and what comparing yourself to another. I think one of the important things as a carer and a mum and somebody who is advocating for the space like yourself, being able to stop and pause and recognize that nobody's journey is the same
Hmm.
and nobody's boundary can be the same as another person's boundary. And by comparing ourselves to another carer or another mom or another business owner, can't really be applied because that's when things don't go as easily as they could because we're not in our space.
Right.
We're looking at, look, they go to the gym 7 days a week and I can't even fit 30 minutes in. I must be this lazy, no energy. And it's all because I am not putting enough effort in. And so then you're adding another layer of need, another layer of, "Oh,
Guilt.
I have to do this." And it's just, it ends up being an unhealthy cycle that leads to burnout faster.
Right.
So I think part of that message is you are your own person.
Hmm.
There is nobody else on this earth that is the same as you, except maybe an identical twins like my mum and her sister. But like they still have their own nuanced personalities and ways they like to wear their clothes and things. So no one person is the same as another. And mindset, as you often say, is everything.
Hmm.
And how does shifting one's mindset in the space of looking at all of the information that's coming into us all the time? How does shifting one's mindset unlock sustainable work life
Hmm.
balance, self care, and daily well being? And their common mindset hurdles that you help clients to navigate.
Yeah, I think definitely part of that mindset, like you were talking, it's not just about, you know, you've grown up with this kind of belief. I remember hearing like moms had to be martyrs to be good moms. Moms, you put yourself last. You took care of your kids first, everybody first. And taking care of yourself isn't about you're higher and nobody else matters. It's about me too. So it's not like me first, it's me too. And kind of reframing how you think of we're all here to start kind of taking care of ourselves. And when you're doing all these different things, you're showing your kids and your family how to treat you and how to, again, eventually take care of themselves. So you're modeling, which is so important in changing not only your own mindset, but everybody else's. You got to walk the talk, so to speak. And so if you don't act a certain way, it's not going to translate then to how everybody else perceives things. I think, everyone has a little bit different twists sometimes on some of the mindsets because we've all had different experiences growing up. We've all had kind of different beliefs that have been ingrained in us. But I think a lot of the times, for whatever reason, even though we talk to ourselves more than we talk to anybody else in the whole world, for whatever reason, it's always negative when we're talking to ourselves. We're always, in some ways, just pre-programmed that whatever the mindset's going to be, it's not usually the nice, kind way we would talk to a friend who came with us with that same problem, that same feeling, that same idea. And so that first piece is recognizing what are some of the thoughts that come up on repeat. So even if the thoughts are different, how we're going to approach it is still going to be very similar. Some people, like you said, it might just be, oh my gosh, I can't, they're always comparing. And so they're trying to keep up with the Joneses and everything they see online, not knowing half of what's happening behind the scenes. Some people, it's that guilt of all the things they think they should be doing or they don't have. But whatever that mindset is, you start catching what are some of the thoughts that come up on repeat. If I had you just sit for 15 minutes without doing anything, no phone, no book, no nothing, just sitting and being with yourself. Gremlins come up. What are the thoughts? Is it about lazy? Is it about work? Is it about other people's assumed expectations? Sometimes we project all these negative thoughts that we think people are thinking. So you start to catch those thoughts. And then we start to not only unpack them, but let's flip the switch. And the easiest way to do that is if you were talking to your kid or your best friend, how would you respond to them? Would you still say, yeah, you really are a slacker. You should totally go do that? Or would you be kinder and have compassion? Grace is something that I think we don't focus on and lean into enough, that grace to be human, that grace to be imperfect. When we're kids, we do so many things and we recognize not being good at them doesn't mean, we're a failure. It just means we haven't learned yet. And I love integrating the term yet. There's a book called Mindset by Carol Dweck that talks about that difference between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. And when we start to have grace and lean into that growth mindset of not yet, and having self-love and self-compassion. Like I said, sometimes you would just write it out or in your head play out the scenario if you were talking to someone you care about. That's the conversations you need to start having with yourself. That's how we need to start changing our mindset. And again, we practice that enough, we go down that road enough, it becomes well-worn, just like those old ingrained thoughts.
Yeah, and when you were talking then about would you say that to your best friend or your child or your mother, that's actually on my mirror.
Mm-hmm.
When like if I'm having a tough time or I'm brushing my teeth, and you do, in those silent moments, you're more critical of
Yeah.
yourself than anybody else. And even if you ask someone to criticize or critique what you're doing, they would still do it in a respectful, kind way. And so it's literally what my post-it note on my mirror says is, would you say that to your best friend?
Mm-hmm.
Try again.
Yeah. I love that we
Because
both have
you're right.
Post-its on our bathroom mirror.
That's right. Because you can't remember everything. When you're in high cortisol or, you're super stressed or you're just outright exhausted, that's when you find the spiral of your negative thoughts set in. And so I think people, when we're going through this process of self-discovery, self-love, being there for ourselves, because it's not something we get taught in schools.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's like a vital piece of missing education for everyone to be able to show grace to themselves. Because, for example, if my son came home and he had a really hard exam and he thought he did the worst and he's like, I'm so stupid, and he gets on that negative, I'm like, show yourself some grace. If mum did that, would you say that to me? And it just stops them in their tracks. Oh, no. No, I probably wouldn't. But that's how I feel about me. And I also have them there because they can read them.
Hmm.
And so when they're having a tough time, if I'm not in the space and they're not ready to share yet, because I think that's the other thing is that we have this distress that what if people know I'm not okay? What if people know that I don't have all my ducks in a row and I'm not this altogether person? Because generally we try and project that everything is fine
Right.
all the time. And all of the lessons that you've been talking about today are not monumental. They're not like, there's no way I can manage to do that. It's not overwhelming because whilst we're talking about all of the different steps, you're not being asked to do all of the steps in the same moment on the same day. This is a gradual discovery of self.
Hmm.
And you have to give yourself grace to rewire,
Yeah.
to relearn. And it's not something, I always say, it's not the 50-meter sprint. It's the marathon that goes for days and days. And it's okay to step back and take a step back and then go forward 2 steps. And you kind of go do this like dance in yourself. I'm doing okay. And then one day, no, and sometimes you let yourself go in those thoughts and in that process. And I feel like my community especially and yours are getting so much gold nuggets and they could just take away one and it would make their well-being so much more empowered
Yeah.
to leading a life of boundaries, self-care, self-love so that they don't burn out because burnout is real. Burnout is something people go, "It won't happen to me." And then it hits them in the face with like a health crisis for themselves.
Yes.
Or just the point of feeling like bone deep exhaustion. It's not just like, oh, I've ran and I'm tired. It's like you sleep, you wake up, it just doesn't go away. And all of these things are so powerful. And I think practical strategies or habits that you've seen make the biggest difference in managing daily overwhelm
Hmm.
because we all have moments of daily
Yeah.
overwhelm. And creating that breathing space we were talking about for self care. What are those practical strategies and habits? And can you share one that you would start with?
Yeah, absolutely. Finding the different options that work for you. Like I said, for me, I know I bookend my day. And for some people, they need to set it up a different way. Definitely when we work together, we go through this whole process of assessing where are you with those 8 different pillars of self-care because they work together as well. You can't just focus on, well, I'm only just going to eat a certain way and work out every day and that's what I'm going to do because we set it up. There's like this wheel analogy. And imagine you're going down the road and you're kind of rolling through your life. But one of the spokes in the visual that I have of your wheel is broken. You might still be able to roll down the road, but you're going to feel that bump, that hit every time you hit that one area. What that would look like is like imagine you're stressed about money and then you're not sleeping well at night because you're worried about it. I don't know about you, but when I don't get a good night's sleep, I am cranky and not great to be around the next day, as well as I crave carbs. And so I'm not eating well either. And then I might not be motivated to work out. And so you can see how these things they kind of work together a little bit. And so you want to be kind of balanced in how you're taking care of yourself as well. If I was going through my day and I was taking care of all these other things, but I was wearing clothes that were too small, too tight, and I just never felt good and my energy would still stink. And so it's how they work together. If I was not organized in some ways in my house and I had to find my keys and it took 20 minutes every morning, again, that's going to affect my energy. And so looking at these different areas of self-care, finding that system that helps you roll through your day best, depending on the season of your life, is what's going to help you in that way. But like I said, wanted to share with you a 1-minute self-care practice that you can start today and actually build that in a 5 care. So you're going to set a reminder on your phone. Phones aren't always bad. You're going to set that reminder to go off maybe 5 times a day. When that reminder goes
Yep.
off, you're then going to set a timer for 1 minute and you're not going to do anything else. You're not going to scroll on social media, check your email, throw a load of laundry in. You're just going to sit there for 1 minute. And maybe you're going to do some box breathing where you do 4 seconds in, 4-second hold. I do 6 to 8 seconds out and another 4-second hold. And, you go through some breathing. You might do some shoulder shrugs. You might have some water to hydrate. You might look outside and take in some nature for those 5 minutes or for that 1 minute. But just in that 1 minute, like I said, your cortisol levels go down, your heart rate goes down, your stress levels go down. You do that, your reminder goes off 5 times a day. You now have a 5 minute self care practice and you get the dopamine hit of setting a goal and achieving it. Maybe at the end of 1 minute, you're like, you know what? I got one more. Now you've added a 2 minutes and things like that. And so that so simple 1 minute, 5 times a day is where you're going to start to see some of those subtle shifts. It's not a one and done, it's not overnight, but you're going to be able to pause and respond rather than react when life happens. You're going to start to be like and more intentional with your breath because you start to see the benefits of it. And like I said, these are things, you might do, it might look different in different ways in different seasons. With kids, I love using bubbles as a great way to teach them breathing because when you teach them to sit and breathe, they start giggling or they start doing stuff, which is great because they're laughing. But if you teach them to blow bubbles, kids know you can't blow bubbles fast because they pop. So it helps them slow
Yeah.
down their breathing, as well as you get that core memory of doing that. And it's a great visual that they can bring up anytime when they're taking a test at school, when they're sitting with friends and feeling stressed, all sorts of things. So it's great practices, again, not only for yourself, but to model as well.
1 minute routine. Thank you so much for sharing it because it is as simple as just taking 1 minute because everybody goes goes to the toilet.
Yeah.
We all have to go to the toilet sometime in the day, and that generally takes a little bit more than 1 minute. But you can even do that exercise if you're on the toilet or if you sit in your car before you turn the car on. It doesn't have to be that you have to take
Mhm.
and like be in a certain place or a certain environment. So I really love that you've shared that 1 minute exercise with us because it's very therapeutic,
You can do
even
it
though it's
sitting in line at the
micro.
grocery store. Nobody knows.
That's correct. And that's the beauty of it is that nobody knows that you're doing something for yourself. And so therefore, guilt doesn't have to be there
Hmm.
because you're not taking from anybody else. And then you see that, oh, in 1 minute, I'm okay. Nobody told me that I was being selfish. Nobody told me that I was not being on my game. And then that's where you start to have a little bit of softening around the edges.
Hmm.
So I wanted to move a little bit into mental fitness because that's a phrase that you use, which is such a refreshing way of looking and thinking about emotional resilience. And
Hmm.
I was wondering, could you unpack what mental fitness means and why it's foundational to bouncing back and thriving?
Yeah. Yeah, because I think, there's a lot of focus on mental health, which I also do as a social worker, but mental health and mental wellness is so different than mental illness. And so being able to kind of have some of that separation where we can focus on our mental health, we can focus on our mental wellness, just like you're going to the dentist for a cleaning, you're going to the doctor for a physical. Emotionally, you're checking in. We're taking care of ourselves in that same way, in a proactive way, rather than waiting till we're now in a place of mental illness. I know some of it is chemically driven, and so you don't have control over that. But for the things we do, building our mental fitness, like I said, it's like building our physical fitness, and we build our physical fitness to build that resilience so that we can keep up with our kids. I can do the stairs without getting out of breath, so that you don't have a heart attack. And so when you think of your mental fitness, you're doing the reps, you're doing the things to build your strength emotionally, because when life blindsides you with the unexpected hard things, you want to have the strength to bounce back rather than unpack and stay there. And so, doing these different self care practices, working on your mindset, setting up your time in a way is going to help you build that strength mentally and emotionally in order to handle it. And like I said, everyone has different workout routines, everyone has different activities they enjoy doing and that maybe work for them based on, again, like I used to be a runner, my back and my knees are like, nope, you are never running again. So again, the kind of activities you do to build your mental fitness might look different than who the guru you see online. And that's, like you said, you can't compare yourself to everybody else. This is your journey, this is your life, and you work in the ways that work best for you. Sometimes, like I said, at a gym, you might work with a trainer to make sure you're doing the exercises with good form, to help you stay accountable, to help you stay consistent. That's why, I love working with people because they see that benefit of working with a coach in this same way. You get there faster, you get there in a more intentional way, and it helps you build that strength a lot stronger and faster than if you were trying to piece it together and figure it out on your own. But there's so many different ways to do that that I love having options for people to find that success, because you find when you're in that space of mental fitness, it's contagious a little bit. Like I said, you're the weatherman when you walk in the room. And if you come in all stormy and out of sorts, all of a sudden it rubs off on everybody else. But when you're in a maybe more centered place, when you're able to respond rather than react, you set the tone as well.
So, with mental fitness, is there a small daily action or a small daily process that our listeners could use to not feel overwhelmed and pressed for time, just to start that process that you're so passionately advocating for?
Yeah, similar to the 1 minute self care practice, the 1 minute mental fitness kind of thing that I would share is the gratitude practice that I started with. You can either do it digitally on your phone in your note setting, you can do it in your head, or I used a actual journal where I would just write 3 things I was grateful for each day. And I loved the fact that not only was it highlighting and helping me notice more of those good things in your day, but like you said, when you're having maybe a tougher time, to be able to look back at those moments. They say there's a book called Joyful by Ingrid Fattel Lee, and she talks about the fact that, everyone's looking for happiness. Everyone's looking for that big happy moment, but it's actually small moments of joy stacked upon each other that help to create a happy life. And so to find those small moments of joy and be able to reflect on them and visit them and kind of savor them, which is another piece that we don't always think about. Gratitude, you can think of those moments, but when you actually savor them, think of more of the senses that were involved in that moment. What did it smell like outside when you were laughing with your friends? What did the sun feel like on your face? What were some of the sounds around you? Your favorite meal, what did it taste like? And when you start to tap into then that kind of sensory piece, now you have a core memory that when you're really maybe struggling with something and you tap back into those feelings and start to, again, those pieces that you savored, it actually brings you back emotionally to that state. And it can help you then get through hard times, because now not only are you thinking about it, but you have that feeling attached to it. And that's where you start to then feel and can go forward in a different way.
Yeah, and I think with gratitude itself, sometimes it's an overwhelming process if you've never done it
Mhm.
before. And I think something across the last 14 years that I've been working and supporting and being in the caring space is that a lot of carers and busy people find it so overwhelming to take that time, because it's like there's no structure for them. They don't really know how to get started.
Mhm.
And so I created just a free gratitude journal to help
That's
people
awesome.
ground in 1 minute.
Mhm.
Episode 1 of this new season was a 7-day challenge for gratitude. And I think people don't understand the value
Mhm.
and the depth that gratitude can change in that space. I wanted to take our conversation about mental fitness a step further. How does focusing on mental fitness help shift from just surviving a stressful life to feeling empowered and alive and sustainable?
Yeah, definitely. Just like any muscle, when you start to flex it, you start to own it a little bit more. And you start to think about, if you, again, from that fit comparison with the physical, if you were going to say run a marathon, you wouldn't go out and run 26 miles, right? You might start with walking around the block once, maybe jog around the block once, and you build that strength, but you can start to see the progress and think of when you are able to run that distance, or maybe you're lifting 20 pounds instead of 2 pounds and things like that. You start to then flex that muscle a little bit more where you're like, oh my gosh, I can do this. And you start to see that growth and possibility of, again, expanding your mindset of, I can do new things, I can do hard things. And mentally, when we start to break out of those old molds, those old kind of habits and ways of doing things and mindset and building that mental fitness and resilience, again, we start to kind of flex that muscle like, oh, I can try this. So it allows us to take risks. And when we start to take risks is where we really start to grow, and when we really start to kind of up level into then those different goals that we've always thought about or things like that. So when you start to have that confidence and that resilience and start to take different risks, we can handle, it not being perfect. We can handle setbacks because we built the strength, that type of thing. We challenge ourselves a little bit more. And so it's really a great gateway to like that next level of not just, being happy on the day to day and living a good life, but really see what your true potential is and kind of keep pushing that edge of what is the potential of how strong am I physically, mentally, and emotionally.
So beautifully said. Physically, mentally, and emotionally. It is definitely not linear. There are so many ups and downs and loop de loops along the way, but looking at it in those small, bite sized areas rather than looking at it in a gigantic way makes it so achievable. And I know that you hear from many women who juggle careers, parenting, relationships, and self care.
Mhm.
What's a question you're often asked that reveals what people most struggle to understand or believe in around finding that balance
Mhm.
between those three areas?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing a lot of times that at least what we focus on as far as that obstacle is our time. I don't have the time. How do I fit it in? How do I do those kind of things? And so we get hung up on the time. We think, oh, when the kids get older, after the holidays, like we put these artificial kind of conditions in place of when we're going to be able to do those kind of things or when we're supposedly going to magically have the time. But the thing is, the truth is, we make the time for the things that are important to us. We just haven't made this as important as we say it really is. And that's part of it. I know that can sound a little harsh, but we really do, we make the time for the things we want to. It's amazingly, like some people will sit in a coffee line at the coffee shop, with drive through for like 15-20 minutes. Like that would give me anxiety to no end. But they make the time for that. Oh, so it's like you make the time for the things you want because you could easily make your coffee at home, have it ready when you're walking out the door. So it's about where is your time going? And that's where some of those priorities, that priority matrix comes in. And actually, for your listeners, I have uh, another free gift. I don't know if we'd already talked about one that I would love to give them. It's a matrix to help them start to even look at those priorities and, the tasks that they're doing each day or that's on their list. Where do they fall so they can start to maybe find some of that free time, find some of the things that can come off their list because that's I think even though their mindset could be an obstacle in the day to day, they're seeing it as their time.
Yes. And I because there's 24 hours in a day, people are constrained by that, and they can't see that there is flexibility and movement and
Look
motion
at
and
it
not
from a whole week
everything.
perspective. Don't look at the hours
Mm,
in a day. Look at how many hours do you have in
mm,
a week? And maybe that gives you
yes.
some more freedom of I don't have to balance my work and life in 24 hours. I just have to find that balance over I forget what the exact number is, but that week number's worth of hours.
And being okay with flexibility
Mhm.
and movement in that space is, as a carer, crisis has come up. One minute everything's fine, and the next minute you're on the way to the hospital because something went awry. And that flexibility, because what you had planned for your day is no longer available to you, and being able to adjust and be okay
Mhm.
with that adjustment. Sometimes we get so rigid in, I have to get all of these things done, that frustration, overwhelm, and scarcity comes in when change happens and all of the things that you planned. And so one of the things I find like so valuable is flexibility of thought for yourself to be able to go, okay, well, I can't do that, but now in this setting. So it's not just that you have one option in your toolkit, as you were talking about in the three different areas. You can adjust and say, okay, well, I know this setting comes up in my life. So if you have thought about it and you have intentionality towards it, you can adjust to then still have your self care, still have your time to bring forth the things that make you thrive to prevent that burnout. And I guess often people aren't sure when to ask for help
Mhm.
or to hit the pause button before your main soul. burns out and fully takes hold of your body, how do you suggest listeners recognize that critical moment, that tipping point,
Mhm.
and what should they do next to try and bring that back so they don't reach a full burnout?
Right. And like you said, that's why when I talk about work life balance, everything's not going to be equal, but how you adapt, how you pivot, those resilience and those boundaries all work together because it's never going to go according to plan. Life never does. But if you're able to have that flexibility to adapt and pivot, you're still able to keep rolling through your day rather than getting stuck in that one moment that didn't go great. So definitely kind of changing the way you're thinking about things is going to help with that. I love asking for help. I've learned to embrace it as my superpower instead of feeling like I was a burden, feeling like I was putting someone out. Again, that mindset piece, those negative beliefs, what I call the mean girls in my head, what they were telling me. I think the more we start to learn, almost that from that phrase, it takes a village, learning that even asking for help ahead of time, the more you get comfortable doing that. And so maybe, just like when it comes to saying no to things, we start with small no's. When it comes to asking for help, start with the small things and think of also how you feel when you're helping somebody else. How good do you feel when you get to help somebody out, when someone asks for a favor and you're able to show up for them? If you said yes, usually you're like, oh, I'm so glad to be able to be there for them and help them. And so think you're giving someone else the opportunity to get that same good feeling and to feel good about themselves for being there for you and helping you. So, reframe how you're thinking about asking for help. It's a gift that you're giving someone in order to be there for you, to show how they care for you and to be able to show up that way. So start asking for help with small things. Even if you feel like I really don't need help with it, the more comfortable you get at asking for help, then when that big moment comes, it's not a new skill you're trying to implement. It's a skill that you've embraced and started to just make part of who you are.
Yes. And I think for myself personally, looking at my journey, and as we've been talking about burnout, as we've been talking about mental fitness, physical fitness, and all of those different elements, it's been 14 years and I still work on it today.
Oh, yeah.
And sometimes those practices change because we're not in a stagnant state in life. And sometimes things need to be readjusted. And I would really love to know before we wrap up today, Daniela, where can listeners find you online to learn more about your work and access your resources so that they
Absolutely.
can continue thriving?
So my website, bestdlife.com, is the best place where you're going to find access to all the free resources that I have. In addition to, if you email me or DM me the word matrix, I will send you, because this isn't on my website, this is a listener only exclusive, that matrix in order to start kind of focusing your time on your priorities, but you'll have access to my podcast, my blog posts, ask me questions there. You can order my book through there and just find different ways, whether you want to work together one on one, or I come into companies as well and do corporate training so that your boss and leadership and everybody kind of can get on that same page when it comes to setting you up for success and not burning out at work.
And I also wanted to say that we want to invite our listeners here to take your free quiz. Are you on the brink of burnout? And they can find that at www.tryinteract.com/share/quiz. And I've got the link in the description below for anybody to access that. I think it's a
And it's on our
simple,
website too.
insightful way to, yeah, and it definitely. And so it's a simple, insightful way to assess their personal stress levels and the next steps, which I think is really important when, if you do have any guilt or shame around not being in the best place in your life, this is way that you can do it where there is no guilt, there is no stress, and it's a safe space for you to start. Finally, what would you want our Radiant Moments family to remember today as they journey towards more balance and daily self-care?
I would come back to grace. Think anytime we're starting a new journey, like you use the word practice, that's one of the key words. It's not going to be a one and done. You need to keep practicing it. And we practice things because we're not perfect at them yet. And that's not the goal. It's always progress over perfection. So just allow yourself the grace to be human, to have hot mess moments, to not have it all figured out, and to know that you're still doing it right and doing okay.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Daniela, for your openness, for your kindness, and the practical wisdom you've shared here today. Your stories and tools are gifts to everyone who's ever felt overwhelmed and is ready to find a new way forward. To my listeners, you don't have to do it all alone, and you don't have to do it all at once. Sometimes the smallest changes, intentional boundaries, and mindset shifts can carry us from surviving to thriving. Be sure to take Daniela's burnout quiz and check out her book, Balance Breakthrough, to deepen this work. Thank you for choosing Radiant Moments. Join us next time for more hope, healing, and heart-led guidance. Until then, take gentle care of your radiant moments.